A big welcome to the Nick Elston Show, hosted by inspirational speaker and transformational speaking coach Nick Elston. This show brings you the people who inspire, motivate, educate, and engage in all walks of life, sharing their insights and experiences honestly, unfiltered, and off script. So, without further ado, let's get stuck into today's show.
Hey everyone, a big welcome back to the Nick Elston Show, Season 4, Episode 8. It's flying by. And another amazing guest to bring you today. A guest that we kind of crossed paths during the past couple of years of lockdown and stuff through the power of the network that is LinkedIn. I have the wonderful Lou McArragher. Big round of applause for Lou.
Thank you so much.
Hi.
Hello. Lovely to be here. Thanks for having me, Nick.
It's lovely to have you along. And the first time I've had a ninja on the show.
Well, there's always a first time for everything.
I'm disappointed you're not wearing like the black robes, like the James Bond kind of villain ninja kind of thing, and you've got the sword and stuff. But I guess whoever lives with you is going to be quite relieved you haven't got the sword and stuff. So
just because you can't see it, Nick, doesn't mean it's not there.
This is very true. You just never know nowadays, do you? You live in
you
such
know
a
what they say about assumptions.
Yeah, what goes on outside of these four kind of corners of the wall? Absolutely. So you are a transformation and change ninja.
Yes, I am.
Tell us about it. Tell us who you are, where you're from, and what you do.
Okay,
well, that's like the chase. If you were going on the chase, that kind of thing.
That's a massive question, but I would be delighted to tell you a little bit about me. So thank you, Nick. So I originally grew up in Asia. I grew up in Singapore, so I didn't have that kind of conventional British upbringing. But it also led me to spend lots of time with Asian philosophies and ancient rituals and things like that. And I've always been really drawn to those sorts of things. So the ninja bit is partly about actually my process and how I approach my work with my clients, but it also kind of is a bit of a nod to the Asian influence in my life, if you like. And the transformation bit is around the work that I do in terms of people's mindset, but also around their strategy, both for themselves and for their businesses. And the change bit is in terms of when I'm working with organizations, helping them to facilitate really deep transformational change, both personally, but also for the organization as well. So when I was thinking about, well, what am I going to call myself? Because I started out life as a lawyer. Then I moved into HR and law. Then I set up my own business as an HR professional, consultant, coach, that kind of thing. And then I went on to my own self-development journey of doing all of my different modalities and adding those into what you experience today. So when I was thinking, well, actually, the word coach covers so many different things and doesn't really tell anybody what that really means. And so what I wanted to do was to say, actually, what I do is I create change and transformation for people. And the ninja bit is because sometimes I do it without you even realizing.
Did you see what I did then? Or did I? That kind of thing. So
yeah,
you're not in Singapore anymore. We started off our call before we hit record by saying, actually, as we record this on the morning of Wednesday, the 2nd of March, it's awful outside. It's windy and grey and wet. So you're not in Singapore anymore. You said about the weather. So where are you now?
Right, so I'm now in the south of England. I'm in a beautiful part of the South Downs called Findon in Worthing, we've been here for a few years now. But actually, there's still a part of my heart out in Singapore. My family is still out there, and I travel out there regularly to see them. We used to work out there for a bit. And actually, top secret, but of course it's not going to be a secret anymore, is that we have plans to set up a retreat in Thailand. So that we can spend more time over in Asia and get away from the British weather.
Love that. That's really cool. So what would this retreat kind of look like without giving the game away too much? Because you want to tease as well, don't you, kind of thing? I get that.
Well, it looks like it's on the beach. It looks like amazing vegan Thai food. It looks like smoothies. It looks like yoga. It looks like Thai massage. It looks like meditation. It looks like coaching. It looks like arriving, feeling less than whole and leaving whole, basically. So you come for, I mean, as I say, it's a future plan, but you'll be coming for a number of days. You might tag it on to a part of a holiday, or it might be the whole experience for you. But it's an opportunity for anybody in their world to think, do you know what, actually, now is the time for me to take some time out to reconnect with who I am and what's important, and to really spend some time getting very connected with all of those different aspects of myself, so that when I re-enter the real world, I can do so from a place of connection, from wholeness, if that makes sense. I talk a lot about my holistic approach, because for me, it's the entire human being. I don't just work with people in terms of their businesses, because of course they're the human in the business. We also look at your spiritual side of things. We also look at your emotional side of things, mental, physical, etc. So the retreat will seek to support people on all of those different levels and have loads of fun at the same time.
Right, that's the shortest show we're ever going to do. I'm now off for the retreat. Thank you very much for joining us. See you next week. Thanks, guys. Cheers. Bye.
Nick, I'll pop you on the waiting list, my lovely.
Yeah, please do. I'm sold. I was there as soon as you started mentioning it. That's really cool. That sounds brilliant. I love that kind of connection between kind of like your ethics, your morals, your beliefs, your passions, and you've interwoven that into your business. Now, we've had, over the seasons, we've had a couple of guests who have really kind of woven their spiritual beliefs into their business. So it actually becomes kind of less of a business, more of a way of life, I guess, in that sense. Yeah. How important is that to you, kind of as you kind of project ongoing into the retreat, into the business? How important is spirituality to you in business?
Do you know what? It literally is everything. And I didn't realize that until, well, it's been a bit of a journey, as it is for everybody. But I tried for so many years to separate the two. In fact, I tried for loads of years to pretend that the other bit wasn't there. And what's been really interesting is that I was called to set up a full moon ceremony, full moon fire ceremony every month. And the number of people who have arrived at that space and said, do you know what, Lou, actually, I've just been in the spiritual closet for years. And you've just created this amazingly safe space for me to start to explore that. And it is incredible, the number of people who are hiding their spirituality or their connection with other things because they don't think that it's mainstream or it's normal or it's going to be somehow considered to be woo-woo. But actually science is now catching up with what the ancient wisdoms have been telling us for thousands of years. And so if you're trying to run a business and it is not connected with who you are, what's important to you, your values and your spirituality, then it's going to feel harder than it needs to.
Interesting. I knew we were going to go down several rabbit holes when the first kind of butchies come on the show. I don't really speak very openly about this, but I'm happy to go here on this kind of show that when it comes to kind of faith and belief and spirituality, when I generalize, when I kind of think bigger picture, I would say that I'm a spiritual person in the sense of I have a belief in something, but I've never labeled that something. And I think with that, there's obviously some freedom in that, but also I think it's something that maybe gets the less attention from my kind of day-to-day, week-to-week kind of life. And I think certainly things that I've kind of picked up and experienced along the way have certainly helped me towards kind of looking at that more, things like meditation, for example. But it's really interesting that you can just have this kind of this faith, this kind of belief in something without even knowing or even wanting, in my case, to attribute a name or a reason to that. But that kind of is a big driver for me, actually. Just got this kind of eternal, optimistic kind of outlook on that kind of spirituality element without even naming it. I mean, how does that even look? And where do people that are looking to strengthen that side of their lives, where do they go? Where do they start?
It's such a great question. And actually, there are loads of different ways that you can start. You can start with working with a coach. You could start with working with journaling. You could start with meditation. You could go to a full moon ceremony. You could start with a drumming circle. You could get in touch with a shamanic healer or any kind of healer. All sorts of different things, all sorts of different practices. You could even just start with taking a moment every single day to pause and just to connect in with the essence of who you are. Just that practice in and of itself is hugely powerful because so many people spend so much time busy in their heads and not connecting actually with what's really important, just jumping from one thing to the other, and it's all external. just taking that time to come back into who you are and reconnect with who you are is so powerful. So you can start just there.
And the full moon ceremony, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Well, I was introduced to fire ceremonies when I was doing one of my pieces of training, and it just spoke to me just so loudly. I was like, wow, I love this. I love the ritual. I love the connection. I love that literally the power of the energy in the room was incredible. And so for a while, I continued to do them secretly and privately, just at home by myself, or with my family if members of my family wanted to join. And it occurred to me, actually, I'd really like to do this for myself ongoing. One of my patterns is to put everybody else first. So I recognize that massively in other people, of course. And I thought, okay, actually, how can I make this happen for myself? Oh, well, the way for me to do that is to show up for other people, because then I will always often, automatically be showing up for myself. And so I just put it out there to say, would anybody be interested in joining me with this particular practice? And the response was overwhelming. It's just a free Facebook group where people rock up once a month, and we go through, essentially we use the power of the full moon to create our intentions and release what's not serving us. And you can use that from a business perspective, from a personal perspective, emotional, spiritual, health, well-being, whatever it is that's going on, or all of it. It's a safe space. Everyone comes and is just exactly who they are in that moment. People bring their kids. It is just beautiful. And the thing is that's really important to me is that because I abandoned my spirituality as a child, because I was taught that it was a load of old mumbo jumbo, I kind of just popped it in a box and popped it away. And actually, I'm really, really want to welcome children into that space to say, this is a really cool thing for you to be involved with and for you to be connected with, and to appreciate the power of that. And so everyone's welcome. And yeah, it's just been a magical experience.
So being through a Facebook or social community, is it kind of a virtual kind of get together?
So for people who are local, they're welcome to join me here at my house. And for people who can't join us, then they come through the power of Zoom. Amazing. So yeah, either way, whatever.
Fantastic. That's really fascinating. And you mentioned the kind of support you've had. Have you had any kind of barriers or kind of rejection from people that may be really defensive about that, or maybe dismissive about that, either personally in terms of your social connections, your friendships and family, but also maybe your professional kind of outlook, as you're very open and proactive in terms of putting forward out there what you're about? And we all know that sometimes business can be a really kind of defensive place and actually really kind of like non-fluffy, non-woo-woo kind of stuff. And
absolutely.
Have you ever had that kind of rejection or kind of encounter before, and the negative impact?
That's a really interesting question. And I think that's what I feared. And that's one of the reasons why I didn't sort of bring the two together for years. But interestingly, no. The number of people I've spoken to who actually really, really want to be able to lean into this stuff, but because of exactly what you've said, they feared it and they haven't done it. But they recognize that as soon as they do lean into it, it provides them so much power and so much opportunity for them to then create whatever it is that they're choosing to create. It's that I was thinking about our conversation yesterday, and it's that kind of oft used phrase of stepping into your personal power. What does that actually mean? Does anyone really know what that actually means? Well, actually what it means is really being very grounded and very confident in who you are and what you're about. And that is incredibly liberating. And it literally does come from the power comes from within. So how fantastic would that be if the leaders of our businesses were able to come from that place? If they were able to lead from that place, then there's no fear. You're not leading from a place of fear. You're not leading from a place of anger or scarcity or any of that stuff. You can lead from a conscious place of being very connected, which is kind of leads into talking about the name of my business. But, it provides that opportunity for people to be really, really grounded and connected with who they are and what's important to them. And when they're leading their businesses and teams, that becomes the guiding light for them. So you can't really go very far wrong.
Do you think then there's a generational and cultural change around more of a focus on emotional leadership now? And I think maybe is that why it's been, so we say, kind of better received? You work not exclusively by any means, but you do focus on women are looking kind of on LinkedIn, kind of around the kind of the 40 mark from certain sectors. Is there a feminine energy coming through this as well? And do you have more kind of, do you have less engagement from men or more challenges from men?
So many questions in there, Nick.
Yes. I think this is kind of how my mind works. Welcome to OCD and GAD, by the way. This is kind of how my mind works. This is why I'm so tired all the time.
Well, we can talk about that separately.
We can talk about that, yeah, for sure.
Which of those questions would you like me to answer first, before you take a sip of coffee?
Let's go with the let's go with the female to male ratio in terms of who engages with you.
Okay, so that's a really super question. So a lot of what I do is to encourage women to step into their feminine power, because particularly in that corporate space, women have generally been they've generally had male role models in that more corporate environment, and then they can, and I am generalizing, develop a belief system that in order to get ahead, they have to then wear the masculine energy, and that's where you kind of start to get the labels of being a ball breaker, or even more unkind kind of labels, which aren't necessarily really true, but it's almost like a survival mechanism that that belief system has created, and actually helping both men and women to step into what I was talking about earlier, is that kind of consciously connected leadership, which is also coming from more of a feminine energy. That's not to say that masculine energy doesn't have its place. It absolutely does. That's the stuff that gets shit done. But the feminine energy is the one that helps you connect with humans. And when we're connecting with humans, heart to heart, we can create some really amazing things and do it faster. So it's about really recognizing that part of you that's been abandoned, that you're not accessing, that you would serve you really, really well. To answer part B kind of your question around the ratio of men and women, so I market predominantly to women, and it's interesting the number of men who come and talk to me about how I can support them as well. And particularly through the pandemic, I had more men coming to me and saying, "Hey Lou, I know you only really work with women, but can we talk about some of the stuff I'm navigating too?" And I think men are starting to recognize, actually, just because you're a man doesn't make you less emotional. It doesn't make you have fewer feelings, and it doesn't make you less entitled to explore those and to live a really fulfilled, happy, and joyful life. Everyone deserves that.
Yeah.
And so I think men are just starting to recognize, actually, I don't need to do the stiff upper lip thing. I don't need to be constantly in charge and in control and all the rest of it. It's okay for me to have these moments where stuff doesn't feel great. That's called being human. That's not just being a man. That's just being human.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as my audience knows, I'm a big fluffy guy. I work a lot off of kind of how things feel, energy, vibe, that kind of stuff. And I would say, like, genuinely, I would not say this because you're on the call right now, but
Yes,
genuinely, I find you very easy to talk to. And I think it's because maybe it's that, for me, my personal experiences with the feminine energy becomes a lack of expectation or not wanting to fix in that sense. And I think that as opposed to if I was talking to a man, there's more of an element of, right, okay, let's fix this kind of stuff. So I think it makes you, I would say, safer to engage with in that sense. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does totally make sense. And thank you very much for your lovely compliment. I think part of it as well is that I view everybody as being completely resourceful, completely able to resource their own way out of whatever they're in. They just may need some guiding support or some facilitation, and also they might just have created some blocks themselves, some of those limiting beliefs and patterns and behaviors that really don't serve them and are getting in the way. And sometimes when you take the blinkers off people, the potential is absolutely sky high. It is for everybody, so it's about really just having that ability to shine the light back on somebody so that they can start to see their own potential.
Yeah, absolutely. My other point was around emotional leadership and the rise of emotional leadership. So what I mean by this, because it's very subjective as a term, I guess, I've delivered a session recently to a local college where it was around emotional leadership through the use of vulnerability. So obviously I'm the extreme of of what a lot of people would share, because I'm very open about everything.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, and as he would, probably why we get on so well. But the use of things like vulnerability, in terms of to lead, to influence other people, to bring other people in, to build your following, to influence people. And it very much aligns, I guess, with the quarterly Find Your Voice events that I do to help people with public speaking, is being afraid to show more vulnerability, to lead emotionally, because to lead speaking is essentially delivering any message to any audience. When was your first experience of being vulnerable to kind of lead, or vulnerable to influence? Because I think that as somebody who's very self-aware, you appear to have that knowledge yourself, but then portraying that to somebody else is different, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And, having spent a lot of time in the legal industry, it is not an environment where you're encouraged to be vulnerable, for sure. And, it took a while, if I'm honest, it took a while to feel safe enough to be able to do that. And actually now it's a kind of a daily practice, because we're all human beings who are completely fallible. We all cock up every day, whether we admit it or not is another matter, but none of us is perfect, and that's okay. That's called being perfectly imperfect, and that's again being human. When you talk about emotional leadership, though, I just want to make the distinction between being able to share your vulnerabilities in and of the moment to make it possible for others to do the same, versus kind of showing up in a space that means that it makes other people feel unsafe. Does that make sense? Because it does.
It's the reason why. For people that have heard my keynotes, that the first thing I will say is that I am not solution focused. I'm not here to fix you. I share my lived experience. Some of the themes I'll mention may really resonate with you, potentially trigger, but then you you safeguard the audience. And in terms of the quarterly events, I actually have a counsellor and a therapist on site to safeguard the room, as you said, because stories are powerful. They can take people different places, and you give people a chance to speak about anything. Then I always give people the caveat: you can make stuff up, but actually when they're doing these emotionally led exercises, everyone decides to tell the truth, because when's the chance you get to speak openly about stuff in a public but closed environment? And
also, who are you serving if you're not telling the truth? Certainly not yourself. You're certainly not doing yourself any favors. So it's always it's always in my mind about actually, if you're going to be truthful with anybody, always start with yourself.
Yeah.
Always bring that truth home first.
Yeah.
And, when you're talking about leadership, the work always starts with the leader. It always starts here. It starts, in you, with you. Because, of course, when you can lead yourself, when you can manage yourself, when you can understand yourself, then you can connect with yourself and what's really important to you. Then it's so much easier to connect with others. It's so much easier to show compassion for other people when you can do it for yourself. It's so much easier to be able to empathize with someone else's position when you're able to show that kindness and empathy to yourself. So the work that I do with leaders is always to start with yourself first, to start to understand, okay, actually, the way that I'm behaving is because of this, and what do I choose instead? What other language could I have here? What other skills and tools could I bring to the situation to improve the outcome? And having that level of self-awareness, because then it enables you to create a much better outcome and a much safer environment for everybody around you who is following you to do the same. Yeah, absolutely. I think speaking of the Find Your Voice event, which is on the last Tuesday of this month, if anybody's interested, in Bristol at Gloucestershire County Cricket Club. Amazing new venue. So really excited for that. And I'm going to get Lou to speak there one event. So I'm going to tie her down to a date on that as well. Yeah, I can't wait. But one of the things I really noticed, it's a really standout thing, that when I run these events, which are essentially, if you were putting a badge on it, public speaking coaching in that sense, but I would say 80% of the attendees are women. But when I get to, especially kind of conference or stadium level events, 80% are male. There's a gender imbalance for sure. There's a disconnect between the desire to deliver a message and actually the platform to deliver a message. And I think that really does align with what you mentioned already about these kind of labels and stigmas and traditional barriers that
women have had to face when delivering a message. There becomes an air of perfectionism in that sense. Yeah, for me, it seems to be, as is a generalism, of course, whereas men have been given the platform to kind of, what's the word? Mental block. Men have been given. See, I don't edit. This is really edit. I'm keeping this in. Just me blobbing about for a minute. Men have been given the platform where actually they're okay to fail in that sense. They don't wait for perfect to deliver. And I think that that's where the imbalance comes. But what's been your experience next? Also, you speak as well. You are a speaker. You deliver messages. Your experience of that gender imbalance when it comes to professional speaking.
Well, I think probably one of the things that I do a lot of work on is imposter syndrome. And I think probably that has a part to play here, because particularly where you're talking about perfectionism. And, you know, I don't want to generalize too much, but it feels to me as though when we look at those bigger stages, we tend to see them populated by men more than women. And so that kind of sets the scene already, doesn't it? You know, women will take themselves to a point, but then the imposter syndrome kind of comes in and goes, well, actually, I'm okay to talk to 300 or 500 people. But if you're asking for a stadium, that's a whole nother kettle of fish. But actually, it doesn't really make any difference. You know, it doesn't in reality make any difference. No. The message is the same. The impact is the same. You're just impacting more people in one sitting. But there will definitely be some interplay going on between the inner narrative and the external expectations put on both of those different genders. You know, men will tend to just kind of brave it out and put a brave face on it and kind of go for it anyway. Women will tend to kind of sit in what feels really uncomfortable and just sort of and shy away from it and go, actually, that's not for me. When actually it could be for them, but again, it'll just be one of those blockers that are getting in the way. One of those internal narratives that says, oh, actually, you know, I don't want to be heard by that many people. Well, how come? You know, and maybe that they haven't had that challenge. They haven't had that, you know, that loving space to help them to say, actually, these people need to hear what you've got to say, you know?
And I think, absolutely. And like with all these things, I think somewhere in the middle is the truth. You need to have an element of being prepared to fail. I know I certainly do.
Yeah.
But also, like you said, that kind of not wanting just to do it because you can. You want to make sure that, like we were saying, we're kind of safeguarding an audience, that you need to really know your material, know your content, know the impact it will have. Because actually, it's not about what we say. That's the bit that people get afraid of. It's about how we make our audience feel. Yeah. And that's when, and then when we're bringing this right back to emotions again, it becomes a very emotionally led experience when we deliver our stories.
This show is sponsored by Forging People, Transformational Speaking Coaching. Are you truly being heard in life, in business, in education, even at home? Your ability to deliver any message with clarity, power, and emotion will have an ultimately defining impact on your success as a speaker, leader, and influencer. For more information, contact team@forgingpeople.com. Are you truly being heard? It's time to find your voice.
Absolutely. And I love what you were saying about, you know, we need to be prepared to fail. Well, actually, failure, even in and of itself, is just a perception. You know, if you look at it as, so that was a big one for me. And, you know, the whole idea of failing was massive. And actually, when you get into the position of being able to turn the idea of failure into actually, there is no such thing as failure. There is just feedback. I'm sure you're really familiar with the story about Thomas Edison and the light bulb. You know, he was asked by a journalist what it felt like to fail 1,000 times. And he basically said, well, I didn't fail 1,000 times. I got 1,000 pieces of feedback about how to get it where I wanted it to be.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's just about flipping that narrative again. It's not about failing. It's like, well, if it doesn't pan out quite how I want it to, or if it doesn't feel quite how I expect it to, what can I do differently to make it feel better next time? You know, so even in that kind of mindset of, you know, I'm going to fail or I'm going to succeed, already you're making it quite hard for yourself. But if you're going to go out there and go, I'm going to have the most amazing experience and I'm going to learn from it either way, that's much more empowering already.
Absolutely. What do you think the barriers are for people reaching out to you for help?
I I don't know. That's such a really good question. What are the barriers? I really don't know. I would love to hear from all of your listeners as to what are the barriers to people reaching out to me for help.
Because it's an interesting one, because working more on the kind of the mental health side of things, that some of the barriers around counselling actually could be that need that actually they don't want to be fixed in that sense, or they want to appear to want to be fixed, or it could be sometimes cost or waiting actually when it comes to kind of public services. So I'm just really interested in terms of the coaching perception. So yeah, absolutely. Anybody else, if anybody is looking for coaching or development, what would be your barrier to reaching out for help? Because again, I think there's certainly, I'm guessing there would be a kind of a gender imbalance on that answer too. That sometimes it's perceived as a weakness to reach out for help or support. We should know what we're doing. We should know our shit, as you said. And I just find it really interesting. I've never been afraid to reach out for help, but I also understand that I'm probably in the minority.
Yeah, I think you and I are the same, and that's possibly why I go, well, I don't know why there'd be any reason, why would people would not want to reach out to make things better? Yeah. And there's a much bigger tendency for people to have a business coach. That's much more fashionable these days. But what I offer is that kind of the blend between the business stuff and what we consider the woo-woo stuff, the transformational mindset, heart set stuff. And so people perhaps would maybe fall into that category that you were talking about of actually I'm not sure about that bit in the middle, but that's the bit that's going to get you to do all the other things. You need the rocket fuel to help you deliver on all the business stuff that you want to create. So it could be, I'm not entirely sure that I'm ready to step into all of those things, and that would be a conversation around, well, what is it that you actually want?
Absolutely.
And when are you prepared to get it? Because you can do it now, or you can do it in 5 years' time or 10 years' time. It's up to you. But if you want to do it now, let's go.
Nice. Like that. That's your strap line. That's your strap line sorted.
Thank you.
Let's go.
Let's go. Let's do this.
Anyway, I want to kind of talk to you about social media. So I've had a lot of people on the show over the seasons that have big followings, and actually, to that extent, it becomes, from what they said, it becomes easier because you're less personally involved with each kind of message or transaction. But I also see, especially generationally, working in schools and in universities and colleges, actually, there's a real problem with the impact of social media on not only our mental health, but on our self-esteem, with things like overwhelm and disconnection. I think there's a Harvard study that between 18 and 29-year-olds, social media was the biggest source of anxiety. But in the same survey with the same demographic, it was the biggest source of positive community when it comes to mental health. There's not necessarily the platforms, I would say, but there is a lot of toxicity. And I think that's where I want to kick off talking about this with you, actually. The toxicity of things like social media. Is that something you've experienced, or maybe with your clients have experienced? And how do you become more resilient to that?
It's not something that I've experienced, luckily, but it is definitely out there. And it's kind of like, a new generation of bullying almost, isn't it? Because it kind of goes unseen, or it's under the radar, or that kind of thing. And where I was going, actually, as you were talking, was thinking more about the kids. I've got 3 children, and they're now coming into those ages where they are starting to use social media, and from a parental perspective, it's quite tricky to manage that. It's quite tricky to know, well, who are you talking to, what's going on, and because you can't see it, and you have to trust them to speak up. And it's the same, for us as adults and businesses. If something's going on that doesn't feel right, you have to be able to speak up, and you have to feel comfortable and safe and confident to do that. And to speak out and say that's not okay. It's not, it's not acceptable. And I think more and more people are starting to recognize that there is a duty almost of users for social media to safeguard it as a space where, we will say, actually, this is not an appropriate space for this conversation, or for these comments, or whatever it is. Just because you can't see someone face to face, that rule of, if you wouldn't say it to them face to face, don't put it on social media, is a very simple one, and one that people ought to really consider. It's certainly one that I say to my children. And it's it's like with anything, like with any interaction, it should always be respectful, and it should always consider how that's going to land with somebody else. And if you do make a mistake and it doesn't kind of pan out, again, take the feedback, make it better, own it, and do what you need to do to own it, and then move on. Because let's not all get tied up in just one instance. But you're absolutely right. it is one of those things that people need to be aware of, and people do use and abuse it, and it's not, in my opinion, it's quite distasteful. It makes the environment, quite toxic, like you say.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for that, by the way. And the other thing, by the way, none of us has planned this show, as we all know. There's no agenda, there's no script. I'm literally just batting questions at you, and you're batting them back, which is cool. So the other element of social media I wanted to speak to you, kind of like, I guess, with your specialist hat on in terms of coaching and life coaching and stuff, is around the impact of social media and kind of things like fear of missing out, so FOMO, or it could be actually social media and kind of how we should act and how we should be, kind of how it sets standards in that sense and its impact on our self-esteem.
That massively comes down to judgment, doesn't it? That great old thing of what we should do and shouldn't do, and when we just kind of should all over ourselves, and the judgments about right and wrong and all of that stuff.
Should all over ourselves. I like that. It's really good.
Yeah. Well, if you are a shoulder, if you notice, to all your lovely listeners, if you notice the should word coming out a lot, then just be aware of how much you are shoulding all over yourself, because actually you are just laying loads of judgment out there on yourself, and you don't need to.
I was just about to get the explicit rating out then, just in case this went a bit weird. But okay, we'll go with this.
Nick, you can't say things like that to me.
I've got that available, the explicit rating, just in case.
Yeah. Wonderful. That would go down in history, that I needed an explicit rating. Thank you very much. Where was I?
Yeah,
okay.
So I guess that I think a very kind of common thing is from a social media perspective, even actually from well-intentioned stuff. So you see a lot of, I guess, judgment and happiness are the two things I wanted to pick up on. So it's something that I kind of include in one of my new sessions from my new keynote tour, A Ride Across the Badlands. And it's about this, it sounds great and looks great on an Instagram post. Don't judge people. But absolutely, that's not true. I'm judging you, you're judging me, we're all judging everybody. But there's a difference between doing that and imprinting our beliefs on somebody else, or not having the ability to listen and understand without having to agree. So I think that's certainly one example, the judgment. And the second element to that is happiness. Be happy. Great. Okay. But I think when we start to see happy as our 0 point, that becomes a real challenge. I think the pursuit of happiness is quite a dangerous one, if I'm honest. Just my personal opinion. I personally see, and I think maybe it comes from a position of having mental illness for a long time, mental health challenges for a long time. I see my 0 point, shall we say, the bit that I strive for, as peace of mind. And if I'm there, I'm good. But then happy is above that. So actually, by feeling content at neutral, then actually I really feel the happy. And I think for me, it's the pursuit of happiness sometimes. If we think happy should be our 0 point, then that becomes a challenge, because when we're not feeling happy every day, that becomes then something wrong with me. Do you see what I mean?
I do see what you mean, and I'm curious, and I'd like to ask you a question. Where did this idea of happy being the 0 point come from? Who decided that?
So that's not my 0 point. So peace of mind is my 0 point. So peace of mind, basically, if I woke up tomorrow morning and I was just, which I've got to a point where I am like that now, but actually I can really feel the happiness if I have a great day, kind of thing. Yeah. But I think that what I'm hearing from, especially from school environments, is that through social media kind of influencing, that people expect to be happy all the time. And when they're not happy all the time, they get stressed about that. They get anxious about that, thinking there's something wrong with them, or they haven't got enough. And I think it's the same from a material point of view, is when you have, especially kind of the influencers posting about all this stuff that they have, then they kind of feel that they're missing out because they haven't got that stuff in their lives. Whereas maybe it's a generational thing, but that was certainly not a case when I was kind of going through that same period of my life. So that's kind of where I'm coming at on this point. Is that comparison, thing, and how it thinks that people, I see this a lot in entrepreneurship, actually, when I'm working with kind of startups and incubators, that there's so much kind of, I want to say hype, but I don't mean it in a negative way, around being an entrepreneur, that people think that being an employee is like a negative. When actually I built a career being the best second in command I can be, and there's not one week goes by that I don't want to press a big red eject button and go and do something which is going to be employed, or I don't have to worry about everything else. So I know there's a lot in there, but that's kind of my answer to that. I think it's basically looking at what we're encouraging people to be the starting point. Yeah, I'll leave that with you.
No, it's lovely. So actually it kind of weaves back into the judgment point, is that actually if we can drop the judgment and if we can get to a position of complete acceptance, and that also starts here. So when we can completely accept ourselves, then there's a level of peace from which happiness can emanate. Then we're not having to judge other people because we're not judging ourselves. So again, it starts here. And then in terms of what you were saying about, the happiness and everyone has to be happy and stuff, well, then what can happen is that people can have faux happiness. They just fake it. They fake the happiness, which actually doesn't then fill their cup because it's not real. And it adds extra pressure. I have to be really happy, otherwise I'm not meeting some other standard that someone has set for me, that I'm adhering to and I'm allowing myself to be judged by. Actually there's a continuum and it's different for everybody. So for you, your set point is peace of mind. Beautiful. I mean, what a lovely way to start your day. And then anything from there is a bonus, right? Fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely.
For other people, bouncing out of bed and being joyful Tigger, that's their set point. And that's what's normal for them. So, everyone is an individual, and it's about understanding actually and accepting that, everyone starts from a different set point, and that's okay.
I'm loving this conversation. It's so cool. I knew this was going to go this way when you came on. Really, really good.
But it really is okay. It's not just, I think there is so much pressure put on us, or certainly not me, because I don't accept that, as you can imagine, but on for the children, just going back to the kids, because I see it in the kids a lot, as you say, with all the social media stuff and, all that, it's just, I've got my son who's 10 saying, Mummy, I'm going to have a Lamborghini. And I said, are you now? Okay. Why is that? Because it's the best car. And I said, and how do you know? Oh, because so-and-so said so. That's based on someone else's decision. That's not his decision-making process about the best car. That's because someone has told him that. And we see that all the time. You have to have this, you must have that, the best of this, and all that stuff. And it's just how the material world develops. But again, when we bring it back to being very clear about our needs and wants, I don't think having a green Lamborghini is really going to make him very happy. Do you? Really, when we think about it? So no. Yeah, being super clear about our needs and wants, and actually what those things really are. And they're very, very simple when we bring it back down to the reality of life.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, a green Mustang, I'll go for that. That's down to personal choice, of course. I'm not going to influence anybody. But you're quite right. And you mentioned something which is quite close to home, actually, for me, because last January, I have shared this on the show before, towards the end of last year. Last January, I kind of resumed counselling and therapy to kind of maintain my own positive mental health, especially through the past couple of years. But I just felt I needed that kind of extra space. And I think mental health generally can be quite a heavy space to work in, especially as a non-solution focused person. I don't coach, I'm not a therapist or anything, but I have bigger, heavy conversations. So, and one of the things that I think was so pivotal to how I feel right now is that acceptance word that you use. Yeah. And it was something that was also the most difficult to find as well.
Yeah.
But as soon as I found it, it was kind of like something just switched. So to fully accept that whatever you've done before, whoever you've been before, whatever you said before, whatever's happened to you before, that you have to fully accept exactly where you are right now. And that's tough, isn't it? Especially for people that have been through kind of brutal and horrendous experiences.
It can be tough, for sure. Absolutely. And, I've totally been there where, not in terms of those things, but just in terms of having to take responsibility for myself and accept that actually my life is the sum total of every single decision and choice that I've made to this point. Now, that actually is quite a powerful statement if you think about it, because that is where people have to start blaming other external factors and people and start to go, actually, I'm here in this point in my life because of every decision and choice I've made.
You know, this is interesting. This is taking me back to our first virtual coffee. And I'm so glad you mentioned it, because this is such an interesting one for me, because until I met you, I was adamant that was wrong. I was adamant that statement was wrong. So I've heard it lots of times before.
Oh, here we go.
Yeah. No,
Settle in, listeners.
There's in the soapbox moment. You did actually change my mind, because my question to you after you said that during our virtual coffee, which wasn't recorded, probably thankfully, we went lots of places. I would say that thing about we did the best we could with what we had, that kind of stuff, and I actually kind of confronted that with you. But actually, there's been a lot of times in my life where I don't feel that I have done the best that I could, and I wasn't the best person I could be, and that kind of stuff. And then you countered that with, explain to the listeners and viewers.
What did I count? Did I counter it with the fact that you didn't have the resources at the time?
Yeah.
So
this,
you did do the very best with what you had at the time. That's the key bit. You know, we're all doing the best we have with the resources that we have at that moment in time. And if I can just give you an example, so I know I use lots of kids' examples. I have 3 kids, so apologies. But my son recently had a cross-country competition. Now, he came second last time, and this, 2 years later, it's a different kettle of fish. And he was heaping all of this pressure on himself, not from us, from him and from his peers. And I said to him, listen, at the end of the day, you can only do your best in that moment. And it was interesting because the conversation we had afterwards was, oh, but Mummy, I could have done better. And I said, Cam, did you do your very best? Yes, but I could have done better. And I said, how could you have done better? And he stopped, and he's 10, and he kind of went, and there's this conflict going on, because he's like, but I wanted to do better. But you couldn't have done any better because you did your very best in that moment. And it's the same for you, Nick. Whatever was going on for you at that time, you did your very best based on the resources that you had available, based on all of the different patterns, blockers, limiting beliefs, all of that stuff that you're carrying around at that particular time. That is a different version of you to the one you are today. Yes, if the version of you today found themselves in that situation, could be a very different outcome. But the version of you back then was just doing what they could in that moment.
Wow. Boom.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it made sense the first time you explained it, but I thought it was really important and important enough to bring up here as well. Like I said, I want to be, this is the fantastic thing about lived experience and being open and being vulnerable and having these really kind of in-depth conversations with like candor and clarity, is that everybody sees the reality. Because I know there'll be people that are tuned into this now thinking like, absolutely, I get that. So even if you have made bad decisions, you've done what you could label as bad things, actually there was a reason for that. And it was albeit sometimes a harsh and brutal learning experience. I think that call changed a lot of stuff actually for me. So thank you.
Wow, amazing. And hopefully it enabled you to then have compassion and acceptance for that version of you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'll be honest, still something I'm working on, but yeah, it is interesting. I think, yeah, it's just such a powerful kind of lesson in that, I think. And that's what I love about these kind of apparently random connections.
No such thing as coincidence.
No, exactly. I believe you, and I've always said this, like genuinely, and I've rarely been wrong, that you end up speaking to the right people at the right time. So when kind of things are delayed or we don't meet people right, just it all seems to happen in the right way, but you only know it from in the future. Looking back, you don't see it at the time, do you? So
yeah, hindsight is a wonderful thing for sure.
It is.
It's just why we talk a lot about just trust the process. Just trust it.
Trust the process. That's a line I haven't heard in a little while. Yeah, absolutely. Love that for sure. So I can't believe how much time is flying. So I want to make sure I get in. This is a really, really big question for you.
All right. Okay. I'm ready.
Now, okay. So as we record this again on the 2nd of March, 2022, we have in the UK been through Brexit. We have then gone straight into a pandemic. And we've gone straight into conflict around the world. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of people that are in a position of fear right now. Yep. What would be your advice or insights to people right now to try to keep focus on what they can influence and what's the kind of the best things they can do to boost our self-care right now?
Yeah, it's a lovely question. Thank you so much. You're dead right. There is a lot of fear around, and it's interesting because there was a lot of fear around at the beginning of the pandemic. Then it seems to have kind of subsided, and then of course it's spiked again. So what comes up for me when you ask that question is, and it sounds really simple and kind of flippant, but it's an attitude of gratitude, actually. It's about really having gratitude for all the things that you do have. I did a money mindset webinar recently, and it kind of just blew people's minds to actually go back and thank the money for what it's made available in your life, what it's made possible in your life. And this is the same, having an attitude of gratitude for all the things that you do have. And then also, because of those things, because you're in that position then, and you're, I talk a lot about energy frequency, and you're vibrating at a higher frequency because of your attitude of gratitude, what you might then find is that your fear is slightly more in perspective, as fearful as it is, because of course there's only so much we can control. So remember that in the circle of influence of what you can control is where you can change stuff, and then the rest you have to just allow to be what it's going to be. So within that, there are people who are setting up opportunities to help, the Ukrainian families that are in Poland and stuff like that. If you're called to do things like that, then of course you can do, whether it's giving time or money or objects or whatever it might be, advice or, expertise to provide support. That definitely also really helps, and it fills your cup and it raises your vibrations too. Keeping yourself away from the news too is really, really helpful in terms of managing what you are consuming. It's really important for you to be in charge of what you're consuming rather than just allowing it to be coming at you in an onslaught, because then you're not managing your own well-being. You're having it managed for you by the fearful news that will be coming in all different directions. It's literally, you can't escape it. It's on your phone, it's on your tablet, it's on your PC, it's on your computer, it's everywhere. It's on the television and the radio, etc. So manage the amount of news that you're consuming. If it's really important for you to be up to date, great, but you choose when you do that, and then you choose when you come away from it. Through the pandemic, I discovered a love of gardening. I found actually getting in the garden, sowing some seeds, this is the perfect time of year to do that, was just incredible for my mental health. Being able to watch things grow and nurture in a time of huge fear and, what can feel very destructive, it certainly does if I really sit in it for too long, that can really counter it. And it's very simple things like that. Getting out in nature, going for walks, keeping things in perspective, and just looking after what you can look after makes a big difference. So hopefully there's some tips in there. There are also all the usual ones around, eating properly, sleeping properly, drinking plenty of water, avoiding all the numbing things like drugs, alcohol, all that kind of stuff, as much as you can. And, if none of those things are enough, then get some support. Reach out to a coach, a therapist, a friend, get some support.
Thank you so much. Beautiful. Good stuff. And we do have subscribers in Ukraine. So I just want to say we send our thoughts and loves and wishes to you right now.
Huge love to you.
We hope you are safe and well. And of course, as always, you can reach out to us on the show as well. So as I ask every person that comes on the show, I am now the MC of the O2 Arena in London. 20,000 people paid our hard-earned money to come and hear you speak. You're sat back in the green room with your feet up on the table, drinking a Prosecco, or not, based on what you just said.
No, I do love a Prosecco, but, gin, I'll take either.
Cool. I'm just about to announce you to the stage, and your walk-on music kicks in. That song that motivates you, that lifts you, that gets you at peak state. What would your walk-on track be? Why?
I've been thinking about this one, and I don't think I have just one, Nick. I might have to have a compilation, just to mix it up.
Megamix.
A Megamix, yes! I need a Megamix. Yeah, really good question. And today, Matthew, for some reason, it is Dolly Parton working 9 to 5. I don't know why, but it's just a monumental song.
It's my country music vibes coming through the airways to you, that's why. And there we go.
Yeah.
And that's going to be the intro clip. Right
yes.
there.
Perfect.
So, big round of applause, Lou McArragher.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's been so much fun and I really appreciate it.
Amazing. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you to everybody else for joining in today. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation as much as I did. Genuinely, really did. One of the most enjoyable ones I've done in the 4 seasons I've been doing this. Thank you to Lou. So please do hit subscribe and like and love and all that kind of jazz. And stay tuned for next Monday's episode where I'll have another amazing guest coming your way. But in the meantime, take care, be happy and stay well. Cheers, guys. Bye-bye. Bye.
Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode. Do hit the like button and subscribe to stay tuned for future episodes. Published every Monday and available through YouTube or the podcast platform of your choice. See you next week.